there's, regardless of the issue, there has been a perception and a voting bloc that is historically, over the past few years, voted together. Ron, Don, and John. And it's kind of upset some of the residents. How can we be assured that you are going to be an independent thinker and an independent vote on that council?
Well, I think when you're evaluating anybody, other than knowing them personally, you got to evaluate what life experiences that they have. And have they done it before? Like I said, I understand it's not a business, and you know, a lot of people entering politics, I think, at least I've seen over the years, well, it needs to be more like a business and so forth. And I think there's many attributes that are like that. And in these tough economic times, I think those attributes are probably more important. And those are things that I've experienced. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure, city personnel-wise, what the retention rate is, and if people that have been fired for performance or let go or reviewed or evaluated. But I know in business that happens all the time, and you don't get ahead and you don't survive through times like this and remain in business unless you do that. We have a $52 million plus entity that's running there, and it would seem strange to me that nobody's been terminated for performance issues. You'd be hard pressed to find a company of that size that didn't have performance issues from some employee within their ranks. It just happens. So you got to hold the people accountable. We, as a council, we're not going to go down and deal with staff people directly, but we've got to set that tone with the executive management and expect some level of accountability to provide the service that we're expecting.
The neighboring cities such as La Havre, Placentia, Fullerton have all cut salaries, obviously for economic reasons and the environment that we're in. How would you maintain some sort of fiscal responsibility? Now, you kind of alluded to a little bit of that in your opening statement, but if you could address the question more specifically, how do you plan on addressing that fiscal responsibility issue?
Well, I don't think there's any way of getting around it. The largest budget item in city government and most government agencies are staff positions. We've got to fund our public safety first. I think that's one of the main reasons you're organized. But even there, we find the level of service down in the fire department. In the Brea PD, we find we pay one of the highest per capita dollar amounts for our police department. Yet Yorba Linda pays one of the lowest amounts. And comparing those two, to bring up Placentia, I think we pay 25% more per capita than Placentia does. Now, albeit we've got the Brea Mall and we bring in a larger amount of outside people into our city, but it's also a smaller city with regards to square miles and so forth. So I think every department's got to look at what they can do for our budget, and we start from the top. What level of service do we want and expect to pay for? And we need to maintain our infrastructure. And then we've got to provide oversight to development and so forth like that. But after that, we've got to see what we can afford. That's how you manage your household budgets. That's how you manage business budgets. And I think we need to bring some of those attributes to the city council in its budget process.
In your response that you just gave, it was actually interesting that you pointed out some salary issues. And one of the things that occurs in city government is they do a 10-city survey to get a comparative analysis on salary levels. Have you seen any of those or been exposed to any of those yet?
Not on city staff people, other than like departments such as fire and police services.
I'll give you a quick rundown. What happens is the staff will come up and they'll survey 10 cities around the region. And then based on that survey, they will then say the city manager in Santa Ana or the city manager in Anaheim or Fullerton or surrounding cities. There's some criteria in that. But nonetheless, what happens is they get this salary listing and they say, well, since Santa Ana is making X amount, so should Brea's city manager. And there have been some concerns about that in the past because we need to look at our own local economic conditions. We need to look at our own city and kind of work it independently at some level, that's my opinion. So the question has to do with that 10-city survey. And would you support a 10-city survey? And do you see any kind of repercussions or downsides of utilizing other cities, such as Santa Ana and other surrounding cities that may be larger, that may have different infrastructures, may have different staffing problems or benefits when determining our own salaries of our own staff?
Well, I think it certainly would be a tool to use. You can't help but compare, all level of service and benefits, and not only from on a department level, fire department, police department, redevelopment agency, how's it doing, and so forth like that, but also on a staff level. You got to do the same thing when you're hiring employees and hiring managers and hiring executive management personnel. All things that I've done in the past, it's a constant comparison. But I think it can only be one tool. In business, you have a lot of data points to consider. In cities, it's going to be harder to do. Just to compare 10 cities, if they were 10 cities that were exactly like Brea, then that would be easier to do. But each city is going to have its own unique set of problems, geographical or demographical. And I think it can only be a tool. I think it's wrong, would be wrong just to say, okay, this is the average of these cities, and then draw the line, and that's what it is. I think that's a starting point, and then are we better off or worse off than those cities? Is there something that we want a little bit more than Santa Ana or Placentia, La Habra? And if that's the case, then you've got to make those adjustments. But I think it only provides a starting point, and then you've got to go from there.
As you know, a lot of the council's time in the last year, and Mr. Roos is one of the first ones that brought this up, what had to do with fire and the fire services and the fire contracts. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the council recently made a decision to reorganize its local city staff and stay local. So the question is, do you feel an obligation to revisit the fire services delivery decision to make sure it's working?
Well, I think it's important for all aspects of the city budget, departments and personnel, to constantly be reevaluated. Not just on a 2-year budget plan or a 1-year midterm budget plan, but on a fairly consistent basis, especially in light of these economic times. In particular with the fire department, I think there was enough holes in the present structure that was adopted that it needs to be watched very closely. We're not completely independent. We're sharing some services with Fullerton. So I guess we kind of got one foot out the door on total fire department dependents. Now, I think it's probably good if we can afford it, and we can get the level of service to totally have our own fire department. But if it's at the expense of service and staffing levels, then maybe that's not the right decision. And maybe we've got to explore, is it better to contract out? And I understand the agenda of the firefighters. Working for a big agency like OCFA will certainly provide some of them with access to different career routes and so forth, because they'd be within that agency. But just because they have that agenda doesn't make their proposals wrong. But I think it's important for us to understand they've got an agenda too. The important thing for us is what's the level of service? Bottom line, what are we getting? We shouldn't be closing or understaffing a station as important as a station number 4 and so forth. It's a first line of defense for, tinderbox out there. So bottom line, I think it, revisited, reevaluated. Is things going the way that they expected with the shared enforcement with Fullerton? There's a lot of questions there still, and I think it needs to be constantly monitored.
As you're evaluating that, and should the police and fire services need to be increased, or the service levels need to be improved, where should that money come from?
I think that's a part where evaluation and comparison with other cities is important also for those department heads to look at. What service are we providing for the level of dollars that they're receiving? And is there a model out there that is working better than what we're getting now for the same dollars? At $10 million, I don't think our department is underfunded. Are we going to need to be more efficient with those funds? I think in economic times we probably are. But I think first, look at the department. They're really experts in this area. There's well-paid staff and executives in that department. They should be looking at providing the highest level of service for what they're getting compared, and if someone else has a better model, if that better model is outsourcing, then I think that needs serious consideration. And it appeared that we were giving it serious consideration until the quick abrupt face, and then I wonder if we really were giving it serious consideration.
If we have to increase the services, whether it's through contract or through maintaining current city-controlled fire department, and we did have to increase the expense on it, either because of equipment, personnel, expansion, or whatever that may be, where would that revenue, or where would those funds, where should they come from?
Well, we have a $52 million budget, and as much as it hurts, it's like anybody else is dealing with a budget, whether you're dealing with a budget in your house or you're dealing with a budget in your business and so forth. Ultimately, you got to say what's important. And police and fire, they make up more than half the budget, but not all of the budget. So ultimately, it's got to come from somewhere. I definitely agree. My response and representation for Brea citizens and residents is that fire and police department is our #1 priority. I think it's most of the budget. At some point, you got to follow the money, and it should be most of our concentration at the city council. After that, then some services or some staff levels need to be evaluated in that level of importance. And we just might not be able to afford all of that stuff. But if it's deemed to be that important, then we need to fund those things first, and then fund the other things second and third and fourth to that, and hold the departments accountable to get the best service out of the money that they're providing.